Hello and welcome to MASHmouth, a podcast covering every single episode of the hit 1970s sitcom MASH. I'm Ethan.
And I'm Vanessa.
Vanessa, hello. Today's episode is a very special episode, in my opinion, because it takes place entirely outside of the 4077 camp, and it's mostly them lost in the woods after their bus breaks down. That's sort of the plot of this episode. So I wanted to ask you if you have any camping stories or any stories of being stranded or some car broke down. Do you have any stories about that?
Yes, I do. So for the first, I want to say 22 years of my life, my mom delivered newspapers.
Right.
That's a job where your car breaks down a lot. So when I was younger, I would go with her sometimes, and she always had junker cars to do it because it just destroys your car. And so there were several times where we broke down and had to, call my dad to come fix the car or tow the car or something like that. And one specific time we were in, I think, one of her newspaper cars, and we were just driving it around with my grandmother. And then all of a sudden we stopped, we got lunch, we got back in it. And then all of a sudden it just stopped turning. The ignition just didn't work. And when I say the engine wouldn't turn over, the engine wouldn't turn over. But you put the key in the ignition and the key would just spin around. It wouldn't turn the engine on. So that was messed up. But that's a time that I can think of that we were really, really stranded because my grandmother was with us, so we couldn't ask her to come pick us up. My dad was, wherever he was, at work, I guess, because it was the middle of the day. And then, so we're just sitting there well, this is not good. So we actually had to call a taxi and a yellow cab taxi and come get us. This was the days before Uber and stuff. So that was really funny.
I love the Vanessa lore of you being a newspaper salesman. I remember when we were 15, 16, you would occasionally text me at 2 a.m. because you're on your paper route and bored, which was always fun to see in the morning. Oh, I got a text from Vanessa at 2 a.m. What a time to see.
Yep, that was my first job.
I personally don't have many car breakdown stories. Other than on vacation and some things don't start right away, on road trips. But nothing major, nothing that I've remembered over the years. But I have done several camping trips with Boy Scouts, and this is what this episode reminded me the most of. Because I hated those camping trips. They were the worst. I hated being in the woods. It was so hot. The first time we did it, it was with a good group of friends. And then the second year, I didn't know anyone there. And it was just the sweatiest night of my life. And nothing but mosquitoes everywhere. And this episode had big, bad camping trip energy. So that's all I ever thought about while watching this episode.
Oh, yeah, no, camping, that's certainly not for me. I am not a campfire girl, or just a camping girl in general, I guess. But yeah, you're right. This episode did have a lot of camp energy to it.
It did.
Road trip, RV type of energy.
But with the added tension of being in hostile Korea. So
yes.
that did add something to this episode. Let's get into it, actually.
Yeah.
So, in this episode, the bus, the doctors plus Radar all get stranded when their bus breaks down while coming back from a medical conference. After several attempts to fix it, Radar goes missing, a wounded North Korean soldier asks for help, and Frank is his usual self but in crisis mode. Vanessa, what did you think about this episode?
I liked this episode. It was interesting, like you said, at the beginning. It took place entirely outside of the 4077, which I always find very cool when an episode does that. I like when we get out of our typical camp setting. It also did not have a laugh track, which I
didn't even notice that.
Yeah, it didn't have a laugh track, which I always think is quite interesting when an episode features no laugh track, because like like we've established several times before, the writers and the show creators did not want there to be a laugh track at all and used it very sparingly a lot of the times. So I always think that episodes that don't feature a laugh track are, I don't know, like, I know we always joke about it, but like as God intended, because the writers didn't want one in the first place. So I always think that these episodes have like kind of a special place in the writers' hearts when they don't feature any laugh tracks. So I thought that was a pretty cool aspect of this episode too. Story-wise, I feel like it was just okay, but I liked the little interesting things about this episode.
Yes, that's what I would say too. I liked what this episode was doing from like a novelty perspective. I like that they're outside of the camp for the entire episode. There isn't even like an establishing scene where they're like in the camp and then they have to go to this conference and then the episode's like them stuck in the woods. It begins, as they say in film school, in medias res, kind of like in the middle of the action. You know, they're coming back, which is very interesting. I liked the like cinematography on the bus, and I liked the general kind of escalation of crisis. But I just always am very annoyed at like sitcom episodes that have the characters stranded in the woods. I feel like that's like a trope. I feel like that happens in a lot of shows. Like that's a Brooklyn Nine-Nine episode. That's a New Girl episode. Like a lot of things do this kind of story. And obviously this has the added wrinkle of it being like in Korea. So there's different like circumstance. But like I had to move past my personal bias of not liking episodes where people are in the woods to kind of appreciate this episode.
So I guess you wouldn't like the episode of The Sopranos where they're stuck in the Pine Barrens, huh?
I hear that's the best episode of the show, though. So there's different
It's certainly the funniest episode, I think.
Oh, man.
That's really interesting that you say that, too, because that seems like the stuck in the woods type of episode that you're describing. That seems like a very kind of almost generic sitcom type of episode where like a sitcom-y trope almost, where every sitcom just always features some type of stranded in the woods episodes. And I think that kind of marks a type of shift in this show where MASH itself was this kind of anti-war sentiment, political type of show in the beginning. And as it goes on, you definitely, I don't want to say lose that entirely, but there are definitely more sitcom type show episodes as the series progresses in terms of things like this, where it's like its structure becomes more A and B plot. It features a lot more kind of like goofier, typically like sitcom things. So it's really interesting that you kind of picked up on this, like, oh, I really don't like this like sitcom trope type of thing for this episode. I think that's just interesting. And like I said, the shift kind of comes with the cast change, like, and the changing of the decades from the 70s to the 80s. So I just think that's very interesting that you brought that up.
No, that's super interesting. I like that you have the entire series kind of in context while watching it now, so you can spot where this change is beginning. And even though I said that this is a very like typical kind of sitcom-y episode, I think what makes it better than the average one, like it's not like they're on a camping trip or whatever, and it's like, oh, you didn't bring the map or whatever. They are stranded in rural Korea, which I think adds like more of the MASH wrinkle to it. Like it's a different kind of energy than just being like, oh, we're stuck in the woods and, you know, what are we going to do? Like they have to also contend with the fact that they are potentially in a war zone. And that does come up in the actual episode when they eventually do meet a Korean soldier, which we'll talk about. So I feel like it wasn't quite your stock sitcom episode quite yet, but I do see what you're saying, where it is kind of transitioning into being more typical, I guess, with this kind of storyline. So thank you for having that discussion point. That's really interesting.
Yeah, of course. I'm really interested to see that progression linearly because, you know, I have watched the show so many times before. but mostly like out of order, I feel.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see that shift just over time. So, but anyway, like you said, this was not a typical sitcom episode. This was a MASH sitcom episode.
Yes,
so let's get into the zany antics of our boys.
Yes, let's do that. So the episode begins, like I said, with them just on the bus coming home. And I like their little banter that they have going on. And I like that the bus, like, breaking down is something that happens, like, very naturally over time. Like, everyone's like, oh, you scared of the woods? Ha ha ha. And then the bus breaks down, and they're like, oh no, what do we do? And I like how it's like Radar's kind of responsibility to fix it, because, I don't know, just Radar is just your overall, like, you need a job done. He's like the gopher of the group. Like, he'll get stuff done.
Yeah. I noted that too, where Radar is kind of the one to be the mechanic. He's the one trying to fix it. I mean, it makes sense in context as well, because he's like the handyman, right? He's the company clerk. And also the potential for the doctors hurting their hands is very real. Fixing the engine or tinkering around with it. So it would make sense that he would be the one to kind of do it. I also just have to say my 21st century brain got so zapped with this, because I was like, oh my God, imagine going somewhere and not having a GPS on your phone or having a phone, and then when the bus breaks down, they realize they can't really fix it. They have to walk 100 yards in like each direction. They split up and go 100 yards in each direction to see if they can find like a store or civilization type of thing, because they are in the middle of the woods. And I was like, imagine that being the best option. I'm just so spoiled with technology, I guess.
An absolute nightmare, like truly, especially within a foreign country and like no one speaks English. That would be quite bad. And they're quite lucky that they are in a sitcom, because if this happened in like a more dramatic movie or like real life, there's a decent chance that they are just not getting home. But luckily our boys do. And with cell phones and everything, this happens a bit later, but one thing that like reminded me of like, ooh, they're kind of predicting cell phones is Frank trying to talk to somebody on the walkie-talkie for the entire episode. I was like, he's trying to get cell service. And, they don't have cell service yet.
Yeah, I think that this could still work today. I mean, obviously not in the same context, but like the Stranded in the Woods episodes still make sense today, because, cell service is not everywhere, especially if you're in the middle of the woods. So I think that it could still work. But this just felt very much of its time, where it's just like there is no technology. So I liked that. That always does something for me when I'm watching a show pre-cell phone era, which is most shows, I think.
Most shows are pre-cell phone.
Yeah. So I don't know, that like I said, that just always does it for me, where I'm like, imagine not having your phone to tell you where to go. Tragedy.
But anyway, moving on. I think this episode does a good job of escalation of them being stuck in here, because at first they're like, okay, so nobody's around. Let's just go back to the bus and kind of wait it out till morning, and we'll figure it out then. And they have like nice bonding moments. I felt like this was the first time we get like a real peek into everybody's kind of social life when they were young men. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I thought that this was a really good episode to kind of form like a bonding experience and bonding trip between all of our male main characters at this point. Sans Klinger.
Ooh, he should have been here.
It would have been fun, I feel, if he was here. But I think that it did a really good job of like I said, doing that bonding thing between the two or three characters who we already know, and also Colonel Potter and BJ, and putting them in a situation where we wouldn't necessarily know how they would react, almost, because they're new to us. So getting them out of that camp setting, like we know how Trapper would be, we know how Henry would have been, all that I felt was interesting for this episode. So, like you said, there was this bonding moment where they kind of were talking about their first loves. I think it was supposed to be like the first time that they had sex, but they softened it a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit for TV, I think. They wanted to say that not explicitly, and I thought it, the euphemism of it was kind of cute. The way that they're all like, oh, that was your first dance with love or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I thought that it was cute, or I guess not cute, but I thought that it was interesting that BJ was like, hey, let's exchange dirty stories before we have to go be civil with all the nurses. I thought that was pretty funny. And I liked that Colonel Potter also kind of joined in on this this storytelling, like he was one of the guys. And I also liked how Frank did too at a certain point, because we so rarely see Frank just kind of engaging in a positive way with the rest of the camp, or with BJ and Hawkeye. So I liked it. It was a fun time.
No, I thought this was cute too. I like them just kind of being very sincere about it, kind of very open, kind of gossipy, I thought that was kind of fun. I like that we only hear two of the stories. First of all, we don't hear like BJ's story. I think we don't hear Hawkeye's, and I don't think Radar, even though things are a little ambiguous with him, I don't think he has a story within the context of this episode. But I found it really funny that the two people that Frank and Colonel Potter talk about are not people that they were like dating. It's just people that they like came across, which was very like funny, a very like strange kind of thing of like, oh, that's my story. I ran into this one girl from my school and she was driving me home. That was Frank's story. I was like, how'd this happen to Frank Burns? Who is this woman?
Frank Burns is a ladies' man, apparently. I don't know why, because his personality would not suggest that, but apparently he gets the ladies.
Maybe in high school he was like a really handsome devil. You don't know.
But to back up a little bit, and it's also in this scene where they're talking about, their first love, I thought it was really interesting, the little tidbits about Colonel Potter that we got in this episode, because right before this, when Radar is trying to fix the bus and whatnot, Colonel Potter kind of like just drops little like stories about himself. He was saying how he was a POW, like he found himself in this situation, and he was a POW in World War I. And then he was also talking about also in World War I, his first like romance story about how he was temporarily blinded and this nurse took care of him and whatnot. So I thought it was, I liked that we got a little bit more background on Colonel Potter and his experiences in war. Like being a POW, that's insane. Like that's a crazy story and adds so much depth to his character going forward. Like I must have forgotten about that because I was like, wow, I can't believe it.
And we've mentioned this before, that he is kind of an old pro when it comes to being in the army, and like the way that he talks about his past experiences, I think very much exemplify that, because when he's talking about being a POW, he just so casually says like, they shaved my head and beat me for days, and like it's not even remarked upon. It's not like, oh, that's horrible. It's just a thing that happened in his life, and the way that like going to the store, like a way you would describe that is how he kind of delivers that story, which I thought was really interesting and added a lot to his character. So you are right there. I like the glimpses of insight that we get to see, and hopefully get to see more of going into the future. And with what you were saying earlier, actually, with like how we know that Henry would react to this, feel like this would be an entirely different episode if Henry was the man in charge. I feel like there would be a lot more panic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Colonel Potter being so level-headed in this situation, having actually been in similar circumstances before, like being an old pro at a lot of army stuff, I just feel like it adds a level of almost seriousness to the show that we didn't get with Henry before. Yeah, we will not always be comparing the two of Henry and Colonel Potter, but when it is very apparent, it is very apparent, especially having just come off of so many seasons with Henry. But you're right that it brings the show to a different level and has a completely different vibe. Colonel Potter is very much in control, in command, and people, for better or worse, I guess, do what he says.
Yes. With what you're saying, we will, I think, as the show goes on, compare less and less to Henry. But for me, especially because I'm so new to this era of the show, like that is just my point of reference. I'm like, how would Henry have done? And I'm sure in a couple episodes or like at most a season, we won't bring up Henry as much. We will see. Anyone at home, if you want to keep track of our Henry references, we greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, we don't want to lose all of Henry because, it's easy, I feel, to forget about him. Not really, but it's easy as the show goes on to not talk about him as much. And long live Henry Blake, am I right? Long
live Henry Blake. Also, I do want to mention the chocolate that Frank was like scurrying away.
Oh my goodness.
This was so funny and weird and like so in character for Frank that he, I guess unbeknownst to everyone else, has a bag of chocolate. And I thought it was like food rations at first, but they do clarify that it's chocolate specifically. And he is just going to town like a little rabbit on this thing whenever he can. And even during their discussion of first loves, Frank is like panicked of like, oh, what do you want? Well, he's trying to eat this chocolate before he kind of comes around to being an actual human being again. It was just it was a weird runner. I enjoyed it a lot, but it was such a weird like character thing for him to have for this episode that he's just pounding chocolate.
It was so on brand for him, though. Like, he would be the one to be like, yeah, no, not I. I will not be sharing my food rations with everyone who's hungry. No, definitely not. I thought that we had seen this once before with him hoarding food, but I think it was actually what I'm thinking of is the Long John flap where he's hiding the underwear from Margaret and she was really angry at him. Like, you've let me sit here this entire time cold while you're in warm underwear. So very, very on brand for Frank Burns, I feel, to be hoarding the food.
And it being chocolate specifically is such like a 6-year-old thing. Like, he's such a child. And that's my favorite brand of Frank Burns being awful, when he is just a little boy trapped in like a 35-year-old man's body.
He just hasn't progressed socially like at all, apparently. So like I was saying before with Colonel Potter and everybody kind of following Colonel Potter's rules, Radar goes missing at some point in this show, which kind of just happened out of the blue. Like you said, they were all telling these stories and we don't hear Radar's little like romance story because he's like, oh, okay, give me a second. I have to go to the bathroom. And then he goes to the bathroom and then he just doesn't come back. I mean, he comes back eventually, but he's gone. And so Hawkeye wants to go look for him. And Colonel Potter says, no, this is dangerous. You can't do it. And I feel like, not to compare to Henry again, but also to compare to Henry, it wouldn't have happened that way, I feel. Hawkeye would have either just overrode what Henry said, or it would have taken a lot more convincing. And it really didn't take too much convincing from Colonel Potter that Hawkeye should not. And he's saying, like, no, he's putting his foot down. Like, no, you're not going out. It's too dangerous.
Yeah, there's a lot of respect there. And not that Hawkeye didn't respect Henry, but obviously it's a different kind of respect. Like, Colonel Potter just has a lot more authority to him. And I feel like if Radar went missing, I know that, like, Henry likes to play it cool, but in my heart of hearts, I would know that if Radar was in trouble, Henry would want to go after him immediately. Like, I feel like he's such his dad that it'd be kind of weird if he wasn't, like, protective of him. But it worked for Colonel Potter being, like, more rational, more, like, military-minded, less attached to everyone in this circumstance of like, no, you need to think about yourself, you need to think about like survival, versus like Frank, where it's just like, oh, who cares about Radar? Like, I don't really care. It wasn't like calloused, you know what I mean? It was like more, you need to be in perspective here.
Yes, and I think that that's what I like about Colonel Potter is that he is very, like they describe him as regular army, but he is not cold or uncaring about people. He just sees things from a different perspective. And that's not a bad thing. It's just different from what we've seen before. And like, yeah, that is one thing that I do love about Colonel Potter for sure. But I thought that this was having Radar go missing, especially because we are not too far into the season, was probably maybe a little nerve-wracking for people who were watching this, live in the 70s, because the showrunners seem to have a proclivity of killing off main characters.
Oh, man.
Who knows?
It would have been insane if they were like, oh, Radar got shot and he died in the woods and we never saw him again. But
that's terrible.
Considering how abrupt and insane Henry's death is, like, you probably couldn't put it past them. So I agree there. If you're watching this live with no context of, like, Gary Burghoff in however many more episodes, you'd be like, is this the end of good old Radar?
Yeah, that's all I could think about when Radar wandered off, was that, would the audience be thinking that they would pull like another Henry thing again so soon after? I don't know, maybe.
Because, we're in a transitionary period. Maybe this was thought to be like, ooh, we're going to cleanse everybody who's non-essential to the main cast. Who knows?
Yeah. So Radar is missing, like we said, for basically the remainder of this episode. Yeah. But the other main thing that happens is that this North Korean soldier comes upon the bus and is asking for help because he is wounded. And I really thought that this, in the tail end of this episode, was really beautifully placed. Like it said a lot. And I definitely want to get your thoughts about this North Korean soldier.
This is what elevated the entire episode for me. This is what took it from a semi-annoying, like, Lost in the Woods episode to a MASH episode for me, where it's like, okay, they kind of know what they're doing. Like, this is a good story for them to tell with this setting. I liked this a lot. They reused an actor from an earlier episode. I forget what exact character he was playing, but immediately I was like, oh, it's that guy again. And they don't recognize him at all. And it's like, oh, so that's how we're going to do it, huh? Okay.
Yes, the actor who played this North Korean soldier is Soon Taek Oh, who was in Love and Marriage. He was the one who was trying to be reunited with his pregnant wife in the last season, actually. So that was cool to see him again. He is unfortunately not the same character, but he is booked and blessed and working, and we love to see it.
We love to see people book and get jobs. Let's go. And he has such a kind face. I like seeing him because he's got like such an expressive, like, good face for this kind of thing, especially because he has no English lines.
I have to just say, though, so his introduction, he comes to the bus and he's putting his hands up. He throws his gun down. He puts his hands up. And Frank Burns says, he's attacking us. He wants us to surrender. And I just have to say, leave it to Frank Burns to say about a man who is doing the universal sign, the internationally recognized sign for I surrender, I am not a threat, to be like, this man is a threat. He's attacking us. Frank Burns should not have a gun in his hands ever, I don't think.
I was so worried that, like, Frank would unprompted shoot him for this entire adventure in this back half. I was like, Frank is just going to shoot this man randomly and probably by accident, and it's going to be terrible, and they're going to have to, like, stitch him up or whatever. It's like, no. And then when he comes onto the bus and they're like, all right, we got to watch this guy. We got to make sure he's okay. Frank, with his gun, for some reason, is the one chosen to watch guard on him. And the entire time, Frank is, like, doing a Dirty Harry routine where he's like, I'm a bad cop. You don't want to get on my bad side, buddy. I'll pull this trigger like you don't. And meanwhile, this man doesn't even speak English, so he has no idea what Frank is threatening him with.
I thought it was so funny that Frank had to exert this, like, tough guy energy to this guy who does not know what he's saying at all, because it's the only person who would, like, maybe take him as a threat, because he knows that Hawkeye, BJ, Colonel Potter, they all know that he's a sham and a moron, so they're not going to give him that, like, tough guy respect that he's so clearly after. But I do think that this was interesting because while Frank is on guard of this soldier or has the duty to watch this soldier, he is doing this whole like caricature routine type of thing of like what you would think a really hardened, tough military guy would be. And meanwhile, you get all of these snippets in the previous scenes of Colonel Potter, who would be this like hardened, tough soldier type of person, and he's not that way.
Yeah.
And I think that this was the writers kind of subtly saying, like, yeah, war is not what you might think it is. You don't have to be this. War and soldiers and whatnot, they're not always these like really tough mega guys all the time, and they don't have to be. It's only warranted when necessary. So I don't know. I just really thought that this nuance between Frank acting a fool, basically, with a gun, and Colonel Potter sharing these stories about his life in the 2 previous huge wars that America fought in was really, really well done.
Yeah, it's like a commentary on like masculinity kind of in general, that there is like authenticity of like being very like a masculine man, and then there's kind of just fake bravado that Frank has, where it's like, that's not real. That's not like what being a real soldier is. He's just kind of playing soldier, even though he's in the actual army.
Right. And I really liked how Colonel Potter understood the necessity of having to guard this soldier who could potentially be harmful to them. And the way he took it of, hey, this is just a necessity out of precaution. And Frank took it as like, yes, this is such a necessity because this man is absolutely a threat to us because he's the enemy soldier, and just being Frank Burns about it, essentially. So yeah, I really liked those parallels.
Yeah, it had like intensity. Like I was kind of on the edge of my seat being like, is Frank going to screw this up? But it was also like, come on, Frank, what are you doing? We know you're not actually this guy.
Right before this scene, too, with Frank guarding the soldier, when BJ and Hawkeye were patching up this North Korean soldier's leg, I thought it was really interesting that the show kind of made fun of itself almost, because Hawkeye was trying to communicate with this soldier. He was saying how he was basically angry at himself that he had been in Korea for so long and he didn't know the language still. He didn't know any words, essentially. And BJ says to him, oh, well, you Americans all think that everybody knows English if you just speak slow and loud. And they make it into a joke, but I just thought that it was really interesting for the writers to include that, kind of making fun of the characters up to this point not knowing any Korean.
Because we've talked about that before. That's come up in the show. And we're like, it's so stupid when they do. And it was so fun to see that like come up in context of this show, especially for the time period that it was produced. It was like nice to see that little bit of like actual commentary on the show's production and like how Americans can carry themselves in foreign lands. I love that. That was one of my favorite lines. BJ's delivery of that I thought was very funny, that he was like very authoritative about it, even though he's American himself, but he was talking like outside of it. I don't know. It was funny. Yeah,
definitely. It was really good. I want to talk to you about this specifically, because it's funny that you mention that BJ's delivery of this line, like he, as if he's not American, it kind of triggered a headcanon for me that like, oh, maybe BJ is, not American. Maybe he's an immigrant, or his family is of like, he might be first generation America or had come to America, that his family is of immigrant descent. I don't know exactly how to describe it.
Perhaps his parents are British or something.
Yeah, or even, of a place where, they don't speak English and he just speaks English. Like he learned English. I just think that because like what, I don't know, why would he be saying it like that otherwise? I mean, for comedy effect for sure, but I'm just thinking like, oh, well, maybe this is BJ's like lived experience where Americans just like speak to him or speak to him or his parents or his family as if they know English. just because they're speaking slowly and loudly, you know? I just thought that was like, it was the first thing I thought of. I was like, oh, that could be so interesting.
That's your fan fiction brain really working it right there.
It really is.
I do love that like ultra nerdy like fan discussion kind of thing. That's my I think that's my favorite thing about rewatch podcasts in general.
I saw this, funny enough, before our TikTok got banned permanently, I saw this TikTok about basically saying that essentially about MASH, of the show has been kept alive so long because fans like to think of it in different ways through the generations. So I think that's, I mean, I used to think that was like just me being like really ridiculous, but the idea that you can kind of keep a show alive by being like, oh, maybe the writers intended this, or oh, maybe the writers intended that, or this character could do this or means this, like stuff like that, I feel like does actually keep old shows alive. So I don't know.
The fact that we're able to talk about these half-hour sitcom episodes with like so much depth, I think just speaks to the show like actually being not just a good sitcom for the time or whatever. It's a good show. And no one will ever believe me. I can't get anyone to watch it with me. I can't get my mom or sister to be like, MASH is good. They all think I'm weird because I do this. I'm sure your parents are like used to it by now. But whenever I try to bring this up, they're like, that's kind of weird.
Hey, listen, we watch MASH every single night in my house after Jeopardy. So
beautiful.
I don't know. I don't think that they think it's that weird.
Like a true old person, you know.
Anyway, so right after this, Frank, of course, falls asleep while he's supposed to be guarding the enemy soldier, who, you know, fortunately is not a threat to anyone.
Yes.
And then Radar comes back, and it's just nice to see Radar alive and well, I think, because of the anxiety of not knowing.
This gave me a lot of tension, too. Because I'm like, Frank is an idiot. He's going to see someone getting onto the bus. He's going to shoot Radar. And then that's going to be a problem. But no, thank goodness. He was a different kind of idiot and was just asleep while supposed to be guarding this man. And I liked their whole like exchange that they had when Radar kind of woke him up. That, first of all, Radar like finds the chocolate. And second of all, Frank is like, well, don't tell anyone who's asleep. That's against the Geneva Convention. And Radar's like, oh, the Geneva Convention. Clearly not having any idea what that is. It was a very funny, quick exchange that kind of was very harried.
Yes, I liked that. And then I liked that everyone was happy that Radar was back. And I forget exactly what the circumstances was, but everyone was shaking his hand, and then the North Korean soldier who like didn't know what was going on was also shaking Radar's hand, and I thought that was just really cute. But unfortunately, Radar said that he went off on his own to try to find like a town or something like that, like wander through the woods to try to find help. Did not come back with any help, unfortunately.
No. And could have told people beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. But they're still stuck on the bus in the morning. But BJ is put in charge of kind of guarding the soldier for the rest of the night. And then in the morning, we have a scene of the North Korean soldier kind of tinkering on under the hood of the bus. And lo and behold, he is a real person and not just some enemy soldier. And he was able to fix the bus.
Which is very cute and very a very fun way to wrap it up. Very classic kind of sitcom, unexpected moment. And I enjoyed, you know, Frank kind of freaking out about it, but the second the bus is fixed, he's like, oh, okay. That's great.
Yeah, time to get on the bus.
And I liked at the very end of this, actually, because, like we said, the entire episode, he's trying to use the walkie-talkie to talk to somebody to no avail. And they get, like, a second walkie-talkie in the bus, and they have this soldier kind of just speak Korean into the walkie-talkie, and Frank thinks that he's like in an enemy channel and he's getting all their secrets. And even BJ is like, well, what use is that to you, because you can't speak Korean, so it means nothing. Which is just all perfect kind of wrap up for this.
Yeah, I loved how they pulled this prank on Frank to make him look stupid because as they get moving again, Radar suggests that Frank might be hiding some chocolate. And then Frank says, oh, yeah, I just remembered I was hiding this chocolate the whole time, or I had this chocolate the whole time. And he gives out the chocolate and stuff. So Hawkeye and BJ, of course, are like taking their revenge. And I thought that was a very good conclusion for this episode.
Yeah, it was a very cute wrap up. I thought it all like came together very well.
Yes, definitely. So I didn't think this episode had a ton of great one-liners, but there were some that I found quite funny. So you go first. Tell me yours.
One of my favorite lines was Frank with his gun saying that, oh, he's an expert shot. He can plug an ace of hearts at 50 feet. And then Hawkeye, just classic, offhandedly says, oh, well, I'll let you know if we're attacked by a bridge club. Just beautiful, beautiful Hawkeye little moment there.
That was one of my favorite lines, too, because all I could think about was a group of old women coming out of the forest and the woods and stuff, like the Golden Girls, like under attack and stuff like that. Oh, God, it was so funny.
An army of old women, but like dressed in Mad Max gear. Beautiful.
Amazing. One of my favorite lines was when they were all talking about their first little like trysts. And Frank was saying, he was describing the girl and he was saying little brunette of the Jewish persuasion. And Hawkeye says, I wonder who persuaded her to be that.
Yes, that kind of saved that moment for me. I was like, ooh, Frank's being a weirdo. And then the Hawkeye line really undercut it, being funny.
I liked that a lot.
And this isn't a line specifically, but BJ and Hawkeye, after they scout their 100 feet, they have this whole conversation about like different fairy tale characters who are lost in the woods. Very Abbott and Costello, like who's on first routine. And then after that, Colonel Potter just goes, are you done? And they're like, yeah, I think so. Just really funny. Like, that was so natural to me. Like, when we talk about the jokes being kind of in universe, in character, that one felt like they were having a good time.
Yeah, I really liked that one too.
So, Vanessa, do you have any trivia for us in this very special camping breakdown episode?
I do. Okay, so this wasn't actually in our main discussion of the episode. We didn't mention it. But there is a point where BJ is in the bus and he's kind of just like peeking over it and just like making funny faces at Hawkeye. And then Hawkeye writes Kilroy in the dust in the window.
Yeah.
And this I was confused about. I was very, very confused because I didn't know what this was in reference to. And I was like, Kilroy? Who is that? So, of course, I had to look it up. And there's this whole legacy lore behind Kilroy. And I didn't even know about it.
I did know about it. This is probably one of my favorite, like, art history memes. I kind of love this stuff, this, like, graffiti kind of thing with, like, an actual historical background. Like, the silly S that people would draw in, like, middle school and no one would know why. And this and Kilroy Was Here. It's all like my favorite kind of thing, just weird things that pop up throughout history. And everyone's like, I don't really know where I learned this from, but I'm gonna draw it here because I've seen it before.
Yeah, I had no idea. And I'm so glad, like with all trivia, I'm so glad that I got to research this because it expanded my knowledge about things. And I love that.
Please tell me more about Kilroy. I'm so interested.
Okay, so Kilroy Was Here. When I looked it up, it was described as a World War II meme.
That's basically what it is.
And that is what it is. So it's most commonly known as, like I said, a World War II meme that American soldiers would graffiti on things when they were deployed around the world, although its origins are in fact debated. The drawing, if anybody doesn't know, look it up, but It is of a bald man with a cartoonishly long nose peeking out from behind a wall with the words "Kilroy was here" somewhere close to it, which is why it was so funny that it was featured in this episode or mentioned in this episode, because BJ was like kind of doing the little peeking out of somewhere thing. So it was just a great thing on the writer's part to include. I thought that was so funny.
Yeah, it felt so natural. Like if you were going through like a history book of like Vietnam War pictures or like World War II pictures, I can imagine someone would take a snapshot of this actually happening, like on a bus with like a frosted window. You know what I mean?
Yes, definitely. So there's a ton of lore around Kilroy and famous figures who have apparently seen and inquired about the drawing during World War II. Like when German soldiers found the saying on American equipment, it apparently led Hitler to believe Kilroy was a code name for a high-level American spy.
Oh, really?
No, like, I'm pretty sure that that's not real. That's like lore around it. You know what I mean?
That's fun. I like that kind of urban legend, though.
Yeah, so I don't think that that's true, like I said, but it's funny to kind of imagine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something else lore-wise, during the Potsdam Conference in 1945, which was the peace conference post-World War II between the Allied powers, Stalin apparently saw the phrase written on a bathroom wall and asked his aides who Kilroy was. And like I said, probably not true, but so funny to think about.
I mean, stranger things have happened. That's pretty low stakes. You can bet that, like, probably someone high up has questioned who Kilroy is here, like what that means. So I believe it. I believe that, honestly.
It's a possibility. I can't back it up. So don't go talking like it's historical fact, guys.
Okay.
But one thing I think is more substantiated than the other two was war photographer Robert Capa noted seeing the phrase "Kilroy was stuck here" written on an abandoned barn wall during the Battle of the Bulge during World War II.
That's really cool. I think I've seen that image, actually. If there's a photograph of it, that might be like one of the more famous historical ones.
Yeah. There's also a video of a person writing "Kilroy was here" on the surface of an atomic bomb when it was being tested during 1946.
Yes, I think that's also massively famous.
Yes. As I said, the origins of Kilroy are unknown, but many people have claimed they originated the signature "Kilroy was here" specifically, including James Kilroy, who was an American shipyard inspector in the 1930s, and whose claims are kind of most substantiated. But there are also claims that Kilroy, the drawing, came from other countries, and many other countries have different names for the drawing, such as Foo, Schmo, Clem, Flywheel, Private Snoops, Overby, Eugene the Jeep, Skabooch, and Sapo.
Oh man, I love that. I love when art history memes have no origin and no one can agree on what the name is. To go back to the silly S, some people call that literally everything. Like there's so many names for that and no one knows where that comes from. It's just implanted in your brain one day.
Yes. So more about Kilroy in other countries. Kilroy was called Chad in the UK and had a different saying next to him, reading "What? No sugar?" which apparently was another well-known little meme saying in the UK at the time due to food rations. And the "What? No blank" was also scrawled by itself and with...
I've heard the "What? No blank" thing before, because that shows up in a lot of like old silent movies too, like in the background of like Charlie Chaplin movies. There's one that has a poster saying "What? No beer?" and it doesn't make any sense. Like if you're watching that now, you have no idea what any of that means.
Yeah, if I hadn't looked this up, I'd have no idea what any of that was talking about. So, Kilroy is or was so well known that the English Oxford Dictionary defines Kilroy as the name of a mythical person. Funny.
Ooh, that's cool.
In other pop culture references to Kilroy, the main character in the Tennessee Williams play Camino Real is seen writing "Kilroy is here" on the wall and revises the "is" to "was" before his final departure from the stage. And I'm pretty sure the name of the main character in that play was Kilroy. And it was kind of saying something about the World War II era genre type of thing. The rock band Styx released a 1983 album called "Kilroy Was Here." And this is what I believe Ethan knows this little drawing saying from. The Kilroy drawing is featured in the opening credits of the 2009 sitcom Community, with the nose of the drawing forming the L in star Joel McHale's name.
Yes, I was going to bring this up if you didn't. This is not the first time I saw the Kilroy drawing, but it's probably the most like notable because it's literally in the beginning of every episode of that show. And I love that show. And I love stuff like this. This is one of my favorite things to look into. I love kind of going down these Wikipedia rabbit holes. This is the kind of stuff that I thrive on. Because I've gone through this exact research phase that you've gone through. I probably could have delivered this trivia if you asked me to.
Well, I'm just really glad that I got to research into it because, like I said, I didn't know what this was. I may have seen the drawings, like it looked a little bit familiar, but I definitely didn't know the history of this. So this was really, really fun for me to look into. And
now you'll see it everywhere because it did not go away. It's in a lot of things.
My great-grandfather, my mom's grandfather, fought in World War II, and I would just really love to be able to talk to him and ask him if he knew this or like drew it anywhere or anything like that. If you have anyone in your life who fought in any previous wars, or just like listen to your elders because you will regret it when they're no longer here.
Oh man, bring it on to a somber note, but yeah, I agree.
Okay, Ethan, so what was your martini rating for this episode?
As usual, when we're talking about this episode, I think I enjoyed it more talking about it than actually watching it. And I'm faltering between a 3 out of 5 and a 3.5, just because like the novelty of being in the woods, I think was really fun and added a lot to it. And they had good commentary kind of stuff with this Korean soldier. So I might have to overcome my personal bias of hating every episode that's set in the woods and give it like a very generous 3.5 out of 5 martinis. You know, I had a good time with this one, I think.
I originally had my rating at 3 out of 5, and I think that our discussion bumped this one to a 3.5 out of 5 for me because of all the things that you said. I really liked the background of Colonel Potter. I liked the commentary. I thought that BJ was just really funny in this episode. I know I didn't really go into it a lot, but I did just like BJ's presence in this episode. Just a good time for me. I really liked this one.
Yeah. We didn't talk about it, but I just love the consistency of BJ just feeling like a nice young man. He just seems like a pleasant guy to be around, which I can't even say about Hawkeye 100% of the time.
Yeah, I think that is a good summary of BJ's character. Just a pleasant guy to be around.
So, just to wrap up, we'd like to give thanks to Jacob Friabalco for being our technical consultant, Vanessa's sister, Melissa, for our awesome cover art, and, of course, our listeners. Links to our music, social media, and contact the show are in the description, as always, and join us next week for Season 4, Episode 8, Dear Mildred. But until then, don't hide chocolate from your hungry coworkers, you absolute jerk. Goodbye, farewell, and amen.
Bye, everyone.